I certainly picked a topic to be my first video in 4 years, but you know what? It's the grave I dug, it's time for me to lie in it. Okay, so in 1908, Adolf Hitler took his second attempt at the entrance exam to the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna. And like his 1907 attempt, he failed, but one of the instructors still gave him encouragement to pursue art as a career, telling him that he should try out for their School of Architecture, noting that Hitler had a particular prevalence for drawing buildings as opposed to things like trees and people. But because he didn't want to go back to secondary school to get the proper credentials to go to the School of Architecture, Hitler instead decided to pursue freelance work in Vienna, making a living painting houses and doing postcards. And during the First World War, he still kept up with his art. During downtime, he would often draw like the barracks, the dressing stations, or even just the battlefield. Miss Ma'am, what? Like most of the problems in his life, Hitler decided to blame his lack of success in art on the Jews, which was exacerbated in the post-war strife left on Germany. And we all know where the story goes from there. Hitler slithered his way up into chancellorship and made Germany the spearhead of one of the most tragic, storied, and scarring events in all of human history, resulting in the deaths of approximately 50 million people, civilian and military personnel alike. 11 million of those people were Jews, Romani, transgender, gay, anybody who didn't fit this cold, unfeeling, nationalist, spiteful vision that Hitler held so close to his chest. A very grim, real reflection of the paintings he wanted so desperately to be his lifeblood. But this video isn't about Hitler nor his art. I'm not qualified nor educated enough to do a detailed psychoanalysis examining how his art reflected his grim psyche. No, this video is about beloved independent cartoonist Bill Plympton and his failure at comedy, in which was cast my favorite actor to indifferently recite the most tasteless, witless script I've ever had the displeasure of giving an hour of my finite time on this dying earth. Which I know sounds just a little bit hyperbolic, but if you've had to watch this film, which I even deign to call it, as many times as I have for your stupid YouTube channel, you would also think that this was some kind of retroactive attack on you and any other poor soul that gave this piteous drivel that says nothing and means less even the slightness of brain space. Yeah, today we're talking about 2017's Hitler's Folly, a live-action mockumentary created by beloved independent cartoonist Bill Plympton, starring Dana Ashbrook of Twin Peaks fame. I'm gonna turn it upside down! And the star of my dreams. And also the only reason I even found out about this film, I saw it listed on his IMDb and it was free on YouTube, so I was just like, okay, why not? And it is probably one of the worst films I've ever seen. So thanks, Dana. So because I don't expect or even want any of you to go and watch this film for yourself, despite how short it is, I've decided that I will just give you a summary of its plot. And to keep this video more succinct, I decided to format it like the film and divide it into chapters. So, Chapter 1, the film. Before the film actually begins, we're greeted by writer-director Bill Plympton in what I can only assume is his dungeon, thanking us for watching the movie. He describes it as wacky and provocative and a film Hollywood would never make, hoping that we, the audience, have a sense of humor, which I feel like are very confidence-inspiring statements to lead us on with before the film has even begun.
And this is a very provocative and kind of wacky look at the movie industry and also Hitler's career as he became a cartoonist. Check out the donate button, and any kind of money would be really appreciated so I can continue making these wacky, weird, bizarre films that Hollywood would never want to produce. So anyway, thank you for watching the film, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you got a sense of humor.
So let's just put a pin in that and keep it in mind as we explore the movie further. We then smash cut to a haggard-looking man who we eventually learn is called Michael, being chased through the streets of New York by poorly ADR'd Nazis. Addressing someone through the camera named Josh, telling him that the Nazis are after him because of a box in his apartment that Josh has to go and locate. As the Nazis start shooting at Michael, he throws the camera up through a nearby window, and we see the love of my life, Dana Ashbrook, playing Josh, appear on screen. He then starts shouting at the Nazis to leave him alone, as if that's supposed to do anything. Before not at all reacting to Michael being shot dead off screen. Which is really funny because we learn later in the film that Michael and Josh are apparently supposed to be really close friends, but you wouldn't get that from the way this scene is acted.
I'm gonna do this for you, buddy.
Anyway, Josh spots the camera, brings it way too close to his face to show us a key that was taped to, strung on. I don't really know the logistics, but the camera had a key, and apparently Josh doesn't know what keys are, because he looks at the key and goes,
What is this?
and it's like, I don't know, Josh. You tell me, man. Josh is our documentarian and will be our narrator throughout most of the film. After finding the box, he takes us back to his apartment to open it in a scene I could only describe as the greatest unintentional parody of a YouTube unboxing video ever.
Open the box.
Josh sorts through the box, finding various wartime regalia, including comics, film reels, and drawings, as well as a map of Nazi land, among other things. And I find this scene really funny because there's no punchline to any of Josh's observations. He's kind of just listing off the things that are in the box. It almost feels like Bill Plympton didn't give Dana Ashbrook a script for this part and just told him to ad-lib, but Dana just couldn't come up with anything.
I don't even know where to begin with this stuff.
After catching himself up off screen, Josh explains in a scene that seems like it was shot early enough that the life was still in Dana Ashbrook's eyes as he tries desperately to insert any kind of emotion into this film, that Michael had stumbled upon an explosive conspiracy that no other news outlet wanted to take on the task of documenting in full. Despite the poorly ADR Nazis banging on his door, Josh decides to take on the task of documenting? That's not a word. Oh my god. Despite the poorly ADR Nazis banging on his door, Josh decides to take it upon himself to document the true story of Hitler's rise and fall.
Raus jetzt, kommt! Raus jetzt, kommt! Gib es zurück! Ja, komm, halt. Gib es zurück! Du alte Sau, du! Raus jetzt, kommt!
Don't worry, I'll go away. So you sit back in your safe armchair at home, and I'll tell you a tale that will singe your short and curlies.
Fortunately, the body chunk of the film is so simple and repetitive that I don't feel the need to give you a step-by-step recap of every single thing that happened. What needs to be known is that in the universe of the film, when Hitler was a child, he stumbled upon an injured baby duck, which he decided to take care of, naming it Downy Duck. Then one day, Adolf's disapproving father found out about the duck and decided to cook it in secret for Adolf's birthday, leaving him traumatized and obsessed with the memory of his precious duck, leading to the creation of his very own OC, named Downy Duck. Inspired by a showing of Steamboat Willie, Hitler, as well as some other Nazi Party figureheads dressed up as cartoon enthusiasts, decided to form the National Animation Cinema Institute Party, or Nazi Party. It's at this point in the film we get a bountiful dearth of tasteful jokes, such as Nazi rallies being enthusiastic animation club meetings where Hitler liked to open up his speeches with lighthearted jokes, or the party's attempted 1923 coup d'etat being an incident where Hitler just got mad at some guy because nobody came to his art exhibition, or the Nazi salute originating from a film club greeting gesture.
That international hand gesture meant, here's where we can be together.
The goose step being inspired by the way people needed to walk down sticky theater aisles, book burnings just being enthusiastic club campfires. You get the idea. Hitler eventually formed Hitlertoons to produce cartoons that would help uplift the downtrodden spirits of the German public. And we're shown one of these such cartoons, which I will admit I did find charming. I do think Hitler's OC Downy Duck is pretty cute. Hitler eventually decides he wants to produce a feature-length film starring his OC Downy Duck, which celebrates German culture based on the opera The Ring of the Nibelungen, and thus began the rise of Hitler's animation empire. One aspect of which was the foreshadowed Nazi land, which we get this horrible, overly long montage showing concept art for, showing off the various zones and attractions, all themed around various German stereotypes, backed by this horrendously jarring yodel music. Despite the prevailing nationalism of the concepts, Hitler was upset by the lacking presence of his OC Downy Duck in the park and a focus on world domination.
And what was all this about world domination? He just wanted to love the world and entertain.
Let's put a pin in that too. Anyway, it's then explained to us how Hitler wasn't obsessed with war or developing weapons of war, but instead wanted to advance the animation industry. He hired fascisteers to improve and invent new forms of animation and enhance things like submarine technology for underwater theaters. We are then greeted by one of many on-screen asides of Josh talking directly to the audience, but I wanted to highlight this one in particular because it almost feels self-aware. Josh is talking about how everything we've heard in the film thus far just sounds like complete nonsense, which feels like Dana Ashbrook breaking character to chastise Bill Plympton for writing this awful movie.
Is this the biggest pile of horse crap you've ever heard? Honestly, really, Michael, how
how much weed were you smoking on a daily basis? Come on. I mean, is this even worth my time?
Nevertheless, Josh relents, lethargically reminding himself that he's doing this for his good pal Michael, which unfortunately means that the film is still going. While I find the one joke that this film has, as unclever and repetitive as it is, rather inoffensive in part because of those traits, I kind of let that lull me into a false sense of security that Bill Plympton would have the tact to not try to make light of the Holocaust. I'm 45 minutes into this hour and 7-minute movie. I fully believe and hope that Bill is just going to not mention it, because honestly, reframing the horrors of the Holocaust as like animator drama is just really gross and insensitive to the memory of its millions of victims, the descendants of which are still feeling the cultural ripple effects of it to this day, including actual persecution and a denial of it having ever happened in the first place. You would think Bill would know better than to try to make light of such a tragedy. You would think.
There is a big misunderstanding about these so-called concentration camps. In fact, they were called like this because we were so involved in the production that we will concentrate on the film all day long. You see, we all were very proud working there, and we were happy working there. But one thing was bothering me. You see, I never had any problems because I am a precise person. But some people, they would not be as precise. You see, they would put the paint over the line. Next day, they were gone. And we never heard of them again. And in the end, when the film came out, their names have not been in the credits. And that was bothering me. But nobody ever talked about that. And that didn't seem fair.
Yeah, put a pin in that. It was at this point in the film that I became so thoroughly exhausted with the meandering, directionless plot that my notes devolved into an angry mess of me silently yelling at this film to just end, so I'll try to keep the final act brief. Hitler's film debuts, everyone hates it, a firefight ensues, Hitler and Eva Braun flee the theater, and as if Dana Ashbrook's narration wasn't bad enough, this latter chunk of the film is narrated entirely in pre-mortem audio files by Michael.
Hey Josh, this is for you. Crazy stuff, huh?
Explaining his conspiracy theory about how not only did Hitler flee the theater, but the country, and explaining how the film reel for The Ring exchanged several hands before ending up in his and now Josh's possession. Josh begins playing the recovered footage of Adolf Hitler's The Ring cycle starring his OC Downey Duck. The poorly ADR Nazis, which have been banging on the door the whole movie, finally break in, shoot the projector, and then everything cuts to black. The film ends with Bill Plympton once again thanking us for watching, asking us to donate money to his website so he can keep making projects like Hitler's Folly, because Hollywood would never fund a film like this.
A film that Hollywood would never make.
And as the video ends on Bill's bored or perhaps oblivious expression, you just kind of sit there staring through him into the eyes of your own reflection and go, yeah, I see why. Okay, so this film is bad, but why is it bad? Chapter 2, this movie has one unfunny joke it repeats for an hour and 7 minutes. Now at this point, I'm sure you've picked up on this film's one joke, because it really does only have one joke, most of which I've skipped, not only for time, but to save you the boredom of hearing it over and over and over again. For the most part, the joke of World War II factoid, but it's cartoonist, is only offensive in its monotony, and if this were a 3-minute or even a 5-minute short, you'd just be like, okay, who cares? It's bad. But it goes on for an hour without any kind of variety or engagement with the merciless satire that Bill purports to be espousing. And just when you think you're about to fall asleep on the 70-second "the Nazis like cartoons" joke, you get hit with this 3-minute sequence about how they were called concentration camps because the workers were so concentrated on their work, slapping you awake like, hey, wait a minute. It almost feels like Bill became self-aware and didn't just jump one shark, but 8 sharks of increasing size just to get to this one joke to get us to start paying attention again. Bill, you can't preemptively dismiss people who don't have a sense of humor when your film's idea of a joke is just Holocaust denial. Like, yeah, I'm sure those living babies that the camp guards threw into the air for target practice were just animators that weren't up to Hitler's snuff. On top of that, all the jokes about how Hitler is an incompetent idiot aren't being made at his expense. At least that's not what it feels like. Every time something goes wrong for this film's version of Hitler, they immediately turn around and remind us that he's a gentle soul that we should sympathize with. When Naziland has exhibits about world domination, Dana Ashbrook is made to deliver this horrible line, "What was all this about world domination? He just wanted to love the world." Like, no, Bill, you can't do that. Your joke can't be that Hitler was some soft boy who didn't understand what was going on. Are you trying to tell me through the logic of your own movie that Hitler was some misunderstood hero in his mission to conquer the world? This film isn't trying to make fun of Hitler or deconstruct his ideologies or his rhetoric or even how he actually behaved. I don't really know what this film is trying to make fun of other than how the animation industry is silly. And like, okay, but why did that need to be framed through the horrors of World War II? It's not even that you can't make jokes about World War II, it's that unless your comedy movie has something satirically profound to say through its use of Holocaust denial, maybe at the expense of Holocaust deniers themselves, just don't make the jokes, Bill. And that's not even to say that when this film tries at other jokes that even those are particularly clever. Like, there's this one bit at the beginning of the film where Josh is going through Michael's apartment and it's just piled high with miscellanea. Josh focuses the camera on a sign on the wall that says "The Sex Life," reading it quietly to himself behind camera. And it's like, what's the punchline here? This isn't relevant to any other part of the movie and never comes back. So why was it included in the final product? If this were a better film, this could have worked as like a visual representation for Michael's crazed psyche of being an out-of-line conspiracy theorist, which could work and provide for an interesting commentary on how conspiracy theorists will literally invent their own evidence to convince others and themselves that they're right. Like, maybe later in the film have Josh go to experts or do his own digging and find out that Michael was lying. He did the drawings, he doctored the footage, and have him like realize that he was almost duped into this conspiracy. Or even have him be faced with the truth and still believe Michael to show how these conspiracy theories can prey on misinformation. But instead the film vindicates Michael. The conspiracy theory is true. I saw a reviewer say that this could have been a good satire of like YouTube conspiracy theorists, parodying how they construct and present their evidence. But the thing is, that's not what this film is trying to be. In every interview, Bill says that this film is simply just a metaphor for the war zone that is animated feature production. I feel like if it was meant to be about anything else, he would have said so.
The more I worked on it, the more I realized how the comparison between Disney and the movie business and the animation business relates to war. I mean, you know, when you try to distribute a film, you try to take over a territory, you get your forces in line, you try and finance it, and you take victims, and so it really is a wonderful comparison. And that's, I want people, when they go see the film, to have a sense of humor.
Instead, Michael is a martyr, a tragic figure that Josh has to clear the name of. With the absence of any actual critique, this film just ends up lionizing Adolf Hitler and dangerous conspiracy theorists like Michael. Which apparently, if you think that's wrong, Bill just thinks you're too politically correct, despite the fact that in real life, these kinds of crazed conspiracy theorists tend to also be the same people who don't believe the Holocaust actually happened. It just ends up being this weird cocktail of uncritical Holocaust denial rhetoric that I'm not even sure Bill was aware he was even writing. This movie's jokes feel like they were written in an hour and then read by absolutely nobody. Like, Bill made an hour and 7-minute production exclusively out of jokes that he should have read through at least one time before going to print, and then not made it. And I'm personally slighted by this film because he decided to put Dana Ashbrook in it. Like, I'm wearing a Bobby Briggs heart pin, for God's sake. Next point, the casting. I was originally going to title this segment The Acting, but then I realized that that segment would just be me going, it's bad, and then moving on. And that's not me trying to say that Dana Ashbrook is a bad actor by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's perfectly fine. Not like an exceptional actor, but he's good. He's my favorite actor, so I'm not gonna like callously condemn him when this is very clearly a directing issue. That's why I titled this segment The Casting, because boy, was this a terrible miscast of Dana Ashbrook. What I think makes Dana appealing as an actor is that he's very likable even when he's playing jerks, which is most of the time. He's just very charismatic and charming and inherently boyish in the way he carries himself that it just makes you want to hug him. Or I do anyway. But I can't. I guess this framed promotional photo of him as Clyde Barrow from the 1992 TV movie Bonnie and Clyde: The True Story will have to do. He also speaks in this California skater boy ingenue accent like he's Disney's Aladdin, but when it's time for him to do a scene with more complex emotion, he can turn his dial way up to 11 and ham it up for the camera. To me, he embodies camp, and it's great. And I think this might be a holdover from his stage acting experience, but he's also very big in his physicality. He's like a cartoon character. His movements are very exaggerated and fluid in a way that complements his campy, hammy acting style very well. He's not really an actor for subtlety. At least I think he really shines when his script allows him to just be a goofball. It makes him really endearing and engaging as a leading man. Like, you could be watching the worst film you've ever seen, but if Dana Ashbrook is your leading man, you know you're gonna have a good time.
Those sandwiches were talking to me.
Unless, of course, you're watching Hitler's Folly, where they cast an actor whose main style seems to be very hyperbolic as an apathetic at worst to bored at best documentarian who spends 99% of his scenes sitting in a chair talking to a camera. It's just such a terrible to downright stupid casting decision. Again, I don't think Dana's a bad actor or couldn't do a more subdued role. Like, before I wrote this portion of the script, I watched the 2012 action thriller The Aggression Scale, which isn't a good movie, by the way, but I do recommend it. And what surprised me was that Dana displayed a clear ability to do a more nuanced role. Because of everything I just mentioned, I never really considered that Dana could play a particularly good villain. He's just too friendly, you know? Jerks, yes, but a straight up villain, no. But he actually managed to be a genuinely intimidating and layered in performance villain.
You want some orange juice? I got plenty of bottles. 2 at a time, that's how I do it. Keeps inner balance. Hey.
If anything, he should have played Michael and then had some like knockoff David Attenborough type of character deliver your boring conspiracy about how Hitler liked cartoons. Give Dana 2 minutes to mug at the camera, kill him, and then save me an hour and 5 minutes because as soon as he's gone, I'm turning it off. I did it with Waxwork and I will do it again. Ironically, Waxwork is another film that just horribly miscast Dana, but in like the opposite way. He should have been the lead. His character is way more interesting than their actual lead.
Never fear, Tony is here. Ladies first.
Dana, buddy, we seriously need to get you a new agent if these are the kinds of roles you're pulling. You're only 55, you're still hot. We can get you in some teen drama as the lead sexy dad or something. Are they still dragging people onto Riverdale? Let's get you on there. The Walking Dead has like 400 spin-offs, right? We can get you on one of those as like the Silver Fox leading man. You could be the Rick of that series and have some kind of like meta callback / crossover with Return of the Living Dead Part 2. And while we're here, dye your hair. I'm putting you forward as my casting for Reed Richards in the MCU. Hashtag Dana Ashbrook is my Reed Richards. Let's get it trending. Actually, according to Bill, it wasn't even Dana's agent that got him this role. Get this. So apparently Bill Plympton was friends with Dana Ashbrook's wife at the time. So when he realized he had the chance to put Bobby Briggs in his Hitler movie, he jumped at the opportunity. Dana Ashbrook is only in this movie because Bill Plympton is a Bobby Briggs stan, which I can respect. But at the same time, I feel like this is a great demonstration of how haphazard this film's production seems to have been. Like, it doesn't even sound like Bill Plympton held any auditions. He just kind of brought Dana Ashbrook on without first seeing if he'd even be right for the role. So now I think it's a good time to talk about the production itself. So you're gonna be shocked to learn that this film didn't have the highest budget. Which is fine. I'm not trying to knock indie artists. A lot of my favorite pieces of art were independently made on little to no budget. But when you hear that this film's budget was $20,000 and then you look at it, you really can't help but wonder where that money even went. It didn't go into getting even one proper camera, that's for sure, because this movie was filmed entirely on iPhone.
And all of it was shot on an iPhone.
I doubt this film was made in iMovie because there are definitely some segments that they just couldn't have done in it. Mostly the part where footage of Hitler in a Downey Duck costume is superimposed over wartime footage. But that doesn't stop the rest of the film from absolutely looking like it was. And there's no shame in using iMovie. That's what I used to edit this video. But there's an obvious level of unprofessionalism when you're still using the default text settings for all of your title cards. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this might have been done in a window Geico's editor. And that's only the tip of the iceberg in terms of this film's shoddy editing. Like, the audio mixing is terrible. I've already harped on the poorly ADR Nazis who at no point actually sound like they exist in the same space as Dana Ashbrook's character. I doubt they even bought any kind of audio equipment for this film because literally nobody was mic'd up, which makes certain parts of the film completely illegible.
Saturday we had a kiddies matinee. We did all right. We didn't get rich, of course, but if you both filmed, it was a very good way to get along.
Like, they didn't even bother to get lavalier mics. There are even parts where Dana Ashbrook noticeably stumbles over his lines and they just keep it in the film.
That I probably shouldn't even be looking.
Also, this cutaway of him clearly reading off of his script, which feels like just a blatant editing mistake. Like they were supposed to overlay footage over this part and they just didn't.
Hitler had the clever idea to do the first feature cartoon using...
And before you say, why does it matter if that kind of shot is in this kind of movie? It's because there's no other shots like that in the entire rest of the film. It's obvious for this part they just told Dana to reach straight off of his script because it would get covered with footage, and then they didn't cover it with footage. Josh isn't reading a quote, he isn't reading out of Michael's notes. In the universe of the film, he's reading his own script, so this shot shouldn't have been left in because it's inconsistent with the rest of the film. And that brings me to the visuals of this film. 10 members of this film's staff spent 6 months compiling footage and photos and editing them to have humorous twists, and it looks awful. And again, I'm not trying to knock any of this film's staff who put in all that time and work, probably at a bare bones rate. The issue is clearly with the production itself. And it's clear that the staff wasn't given enough time or even the budget to properly edit these images in a convincing manner, but that doesn't change the fact that it affects the movie as a whole because it's most of the film. Constantly, there are shots where imposed portions of pictures are made blatant by inconsistent lighting, poor cropping, or quality discrepancy. I think a great example of this is this one picture from the premiere of The Ring that shows 4 soldiers standing in a line. It's clear that this line of soldiers is supposed to be moving away from the camera, but the way it was edited makes it obvious that they just took the same pair of soldiers, duplicated them, and then shrunk them down the line without ever accounting for the horizon line of the background. So instead of creating the effect of the soldiers shrinking into the distance, it instead just looks like 4 soldiers of different sizes standing next to each other, which is such an easy fix that it makes me wonder if this was intentional, and if it was, what's the joke? This visual gag delivers on nothing, it means nothing, so it's not funny, which is only barely worse than it being unintentional because that just means nobody took a second glance at it before inserting it into the final product. It's just kind of lazy, uncaring editing that doesn't even make me want to call this thing a film. It's just a glorified overlong YouTube video, which feels insulting to overlong YouTube videos. Like, Defunctland made an hour and 40-minute video about Disney's Fast Pass system, most likely on a smaller budget and in less time, and that video is TV quality. And it got 13 million views. I get it, these two productions are very different, but you see my point. Like everything else about this film, there's something so passionless and unthoughtful about the way it was made. Like if this had been a parody of YouTube conspiracy theorists, these editing choices would have made more sense and felt intentional. But even if you did read it that way, certain things like the poorly ADR Nazis still don't make sense internally. Like Josh isn't editing them in. They're supposed to be a real antagonistic force that's trying to stop him, so they should sound like they're there. Maybe Bill just didn't want to disturb the neighbors. Though I guess that can't be said for the 3 staff members who quit because they found the content of the film and what they were expected to do for it tasteless, and they would be correct. It's not the editing staff's fault, it's not Dana or any of the other actors' faults. They were doing what they could with the script, time, and budget they were given. The real culprit of this film's failure is, like with any production, isn't the staff, it's the head of the production. Bill wrote and directed the movie. He was in charge. Ultimately, the onus falls to him. Chapter 5. Who even is Bill Plympton? Bill Plympton is an independent animator and cartoonist known for his satirical and political cartoons, as well as commercials, music videos, and several animated shorts which have been nominated for and won awards. He also was a guest animator on TV, such as for programs like The Simpsons. So I'd argue if you're into like the independent animation scene, you know who he is, but like if you're normal, you don't. So you're probably wondering, why did independent animation darling Bill Plympton make a live-action movie? That's a very good question. One which I don't really have an answer for. According to Bill, he was inspired to make this movie after he read an article that said that Hitler supposedly liked Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it got him thinking about what it might have been like if Hitler had been accepted into art school. As he developed the concept, the metaphor for the animation industry or developing an animated feature being like war, trade disputes, territorial skirmish, scrambling for funds came to be. Which, okay, but I'm still wondering why this film had to be live action at all. Only some clips of Downey Duck exist in the film as fully animated segments. Everything else is the doctored photos and video and all the acted portions. So Bill is an animator, but this also isn't his first foray into live action. From what I could find, it looks like Bill worked on 3 other live action projects, which also seem to have been mockumentaries. I couldn't find much info on them other than the trailer for one of them, and just from that short segment, I could tell it was much more competently made.
Do you watch PBS? Haven't you seen Do Elephants Sweat? It had that great scene in it with 2 pachyderms mating in the mud. It was a classic.
And Bill was a director on all 3 of these films, so we know he has experience heading a live action project. So why is Hitler's Folly so bad? And really, the answer to that could be anything but saying budget can only get you so far when there are plenty of other movies with extremely thin budgets that turn out at a much higher quality. But this also isn't a theatrical piece. Bill intentionally didn't release it in the theaters. He didn't think it was that kind of film. But regardless of that, going back to what I said about YouTube videos, we still get much higher quality product in less time with smaller staffs on much smaller budgets. I think the circumstance is just that it had been 20 years since Bill did a live action project, and instead of investing time into learning new techniques or money into new equipment, he just decided to use what was in front of him that he understood, if that. Bill himself admitted to not really engaging much with the staff members that edited the photos in war era video.
I'm very bad with the computer, and I didn't do it.
Don't take my criticisms of Bill as a director as me attacking the man himself. I don't know Bill. I'm not even super familiar with his greater body of work, but it does look pretty good. I'm not here to attack the man's character. He seems perfectly nice. I'm just here to criticize what was put directly in front of me that he made, and it wasn't very good. I've already been super critical of this film and Bill, but we've really only scratched the surface of my criticisms, so before I start to get really mean, let's actually talk about some of the stuff that I liked. If you couldn't tell from my previous comments, I love Dana Ashbrook. He's my favorite actor, and as I said before, the reason that I watched this movie in the first place. And although I didn't think he was particularly good in it, it was still fun to see him, and while his voice isn't the best for narration, it was still fun to hear his funny accent throughout most of the runtime. And I like that they styled him in glasses. He just looks cute in glasses. I loved it. And I like Hitler's OC Downey Duck. I thought he was cute, and I thought the animation that they featured in the film of Downey Duck was really charming. And that's all the things I liked. Sorry. Okay, now it's time for my truly savage takedown of this film. Chapter 7, Why Does Hitler's Folly Fail? Which is a question with a lot of answers, so let's get into it. I think the first major failing of the film is its story. It doesn't really work down to its own concept because the film can't decide what the war is about or even if Hitler wants to be a part of it. On one hand, Hitler just wants to make cartoons and doesn't even really seem to know that the war is going on. But then on the other hand, he wants to make it fun, implying some level of awareness and involvement. This raises another question. What is the war even about? I get that the film is supposed to be absurdist in that it's a war over cartoons, but the film just kind of does a bad job establishing how the war even started. Because the implication at the beginning of the film was that the war wasn't even a physical or even violent thing taking place. But evidently it is, and its escalation just isn't ever explained in a coherent fashion whatsoever. The Nazi Party escalates from a group of comic book loving nerds to a domineering warmongering force hell-bent on taking over the world, and it's never explained how the motivation changed, why, or when. Speaking of motivation, if, according to this film, Hitler and the Nazis weren't that bad, why were the poorly ADR Nazis even trying to stop Josh from making this documentary in the first place? This might be a bit controversial, but nobody really likes Nazis, and for good reason, so wouldn't the Holocaust denial documentary with like mountains of evidence be good for their public image? Again, it's another aspect of the film's story that just isn't really explained. But thinking about it now, like with everything else in this film, had a more clever writer been on board, they could have done something really clever with showing how documentaries like these are so bad that even the people whose names will be cleared by them don't want them to get made. Nazism is bad. Fascism is also bad. Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism are bad. Trying to convince anybody otherwise is so morally reprehensible that it would actually be really funny if the Nazis themselves wanted to stop Josh from trying to convince people of this. But Bill was so high on his horse of offensive humor that he completely forgot to actually inject humor into his script and write anything clever. My biggest beef with this film is that it tries to endear us to Hitler. Like, it makes out the Nazi party like the ones that skewed his vision to become this conquering force, and that Hitler himself either didn't understand that that was happening or didn't want to be a part of it. And the implication of that is honestly pretty sinister. You can make fun of Hitler, obviously. You can call him stupid, childish, whatever. But trying to frame him as a poor soul caught up in the war machine doesn't really say anything. Hitler wasn't like that in real life, so the narrative posing him in that way doesn't really comment on him as a figure. Bill might as well have invented his own dictator to be the hero of his story instead of one of the worst men in history. At about the midway point of the film, when Josh is giving his rant about how stupid the movie we're watching is, he evokes the Mel Brooks comedy The Producers, talking about how people have made movies like this before and didn't get in trouble for it. Which I found really funny because Mel Brooks did get in trouble for it. Plenty of people at the time of that film's release lambasted it for being insensitive to a tragedy that was even more within living memory than Hitler's Folly is. Lindsay Ellis and her team did a really great video specifically about that a few years ago, so I'd recommend you go and watch that. Bill, through Josh, evoking the producers in this way sounds like he's preemptively trying to stave off criticism by saying that this has been done before. Except the reason that a film like The Producers, or rather the show within it, Springtime for Hitler, works is because the joke is the fascism. It subverts its horribleness by kind of just showing it for what it is. A garish, flamboyant performance meant to trick its stupid audience into thinking it's something better than it actually is. Hitler is portrayed as an idiot. The Nazis are portrayed as incompetent, and the joke works because it doesn't try to frame them as in the right. Hitler's Folly does.
Well, talk about bad taste.
So while we're taking down the pin of Hitler being portrayed as a tragic heroic figure, let's also take down the one in the concentration camp sequence. It might be a bit of a hot take, but making jokes at the expense of the people inside the concentration camps might be bad, actually. Wild, I know, but it really just feels like the culmination of the thematic incompetence of this film. Hitler's Folly uncritically portrays Adolf Hitler as a misunderstood artist and the Nazi party as just a bunch of passionate film geeks, which when combined with the concentration camp sequence leaves the film with like a slimy edge that almost starts to feel a little genuine. I'm not accusing Bill Plympton of being a Nazi or even being anti-Semitic. I'm only accusing him of being a bad writer. Lots of people like to tout their preference for dark humor, including Bill. In interviews for this film, it's even talked about how he's no stranger to strange or uncomfortable topics, which ultimately doesn't give me faith in his other projects if this is how he chooses to approach darker subject matter. Now I'd like to talk about the 2014 mockumentary What We Do in the Shadows. Okay, hear me out. This film, which is delightful by the way, I think is actually pretty similar to Hitler's Folly. Not in themes, setting, or production values, not in any way that matters. I mean in how they're pretty consistent in how they choose to present their humor until one extremely jarring, tone-breaking scene near the end of the movie. Where they differ is whether or not the moment pulls you out of the film or draws you back into it. Like Hitler's Folly, What We Do in the Shadows covers some pretty dark subject matter, albeit much less controversial like death and racism, but still pretty dark. What makes this film's comedy work is how unrealistically the people within it engage with the film's darker themes. When people die or are about to die, they don't react in horror, they more or less just act like it's an inconvenience.
Fuck off.
This is demonstrated pretty perfectly by the sequence where Nick is trying to escape the house before he gets turned into a vampire.
You don't think this is weird?
Spoilers, by the way, for What We Do in the Shadows. 8-year-old movie that has spawned several spin-offs, including an extremely popular television series. Sorry. You don't really think about how scary or tragic the events in this film are because the way they're touched upon presents them in such an unrealistic way that it kind of tricks your brain into not engaging with it on the same level you normally would. except for one scene near the end. In a brief scene near the end of the film, the main characters are being chased by a group of werewolves and we watch a cameraman die. Unlike previous deaths in this movie, this character actually reacts extremely realistically to the circumstance. He's like acting scared and like screaming for dear life. The whiplash of this scene, for me anyway, completely pulls me out of the film. I'd wager it's the only bad part of the movie just because it's so tonally dissonant from the rest of it. Regardless of whether or not you think the comedy in Hitler's Folly is inherently tasteless or offensive, I think we can all agree that it's at least harmless, mostly because nobody watched it. But similarly to What We Do in the Shadows, Hitler's Folly engages with its dark subject matter in such a detached, unrealistic way that you're able to get your brain to engage with it on a different level than you would normally. Okay, I've already harped on why the comedy in this movie is bad, but the reason the concentration camp scene is particularly egregious, not only because it's making light of a tragedy that I don't really think should ever be made light, but because it makes the same mistake as the cameraman scene in What We Do in the Shadows. We spent the entire film with a certain tone and sense of humor that our brain has been able to comfortably settle into. Then suddenly something happens that's so horrible that it suddenly snaps you out of the trance that the film has put you in. Unlike What We Do in the Shadows, however, instead of drawing you out of the movie, the concentration camp scene kind of drags you back into it, and your brain starts to recontextualize everything you just watched. Which is almost worse, because now the film just reads like a huge Holocaust denial piece. Is that really what you wanted, Bill? I mean, much like the actors in the film, it's not really giving us much to work with anyway. It just leaves you kind of bitter. This movie is already so unfunny, but now it has the audacity to make fun of the Holocaust. Bill literally bookends his film complaining about how Hollywood would never make his movie and that you shouldn't watch it if you don't have a sense of humor. Why, Bill? Is it because you find people who don't find the joke of concentration camp workers disappear and get scrubbed from the credits funny too politically correct? The way he goes about framing this film in his own words, you'd almost think Bill created Hitler to be like his weird self-insert. I know it's hyperbolic to compare anybody to Hitler nowadays, but doesn't anybody else get that vibe? I'm an artist who wants to share my passion with the world, but the world doesn't get it. That's literally how Bill portrays Adolf Hitler. Oh my gods, and I almost forgot about Bill's blog post about the film's premiere, where he worried that somebody might show up to bomb the theater because I guess they were so offended by the concept of the film. He even notes the 3 staff members that quit in that passage as if to suggest one of them might be out to get him. Gee, this sounds like that one sequence in Hitler's Folly where Rommel, who formed a rival animation group, tried to bomb Hitler in order to stop his production. Is anybody else starting to think that Bill might have some kind of complex? That whole blog post makes me sad, to be honest. Like, look at Dana Ashbrook. He does not look like he wants to be there. Somebody get Grandpa out of there. Honestly, I think the inherent issue, as much as Bill wants to believe people will take umbrage with it, isn't really that the film's jokes are offensive, though they are. It's more so that they're unclever and lack substance and completely misunderstand why films of a similar nature worked before. Bill Plympton is an animator. Now, I'm not saying you can't branch out to other forms of your medium, but at least when the Basics decided to do a web series, it was good, fun entertainment that built upon their previous platform and skills and presented what they're good at in a new, fresh, but still familiar way. And they even won an award for it. And on top of that, we got a lot of good Tim content.
I'm Tim. We're really excited. Let's go and do it.
Good times, sunshine.
Man, I love Tim Heath. Shoutouts to Tim Heath. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah.
I'm Tim.
Chapter 8. Should we let the poorly ADR Nazis destroy Hitler's Folly and leave it forgotten to time? Why, yes. But there's a lot to it, you see? He is not drinking that juice. I've been racking my brain for ages trying to figure out what Bill is trying to say about Nazism through his film, and I've honestly come up with nothing. The film says nothing, it means nothing, and if it means nothing, why even make it? It's not like Bill is making any money from it because he released it for free. There's a version of this film that absolutely does work, but unfortunately Bill is incapable of making that film. There are so many directions that this concept could have been taken in that I honestly can't even fathom how Bill ended up with this finished product. Honestly, I think it's really funny that Bill chose to evoke The Producers, a film about a guy scamming people out of a bunch of money by putting on the worst play he possibly can. That play being one about Hitler and how he was good, actually. And, well, That's what this is, a bad flamboyant spectacle about how Hitler is some hapless funny man, bookended by our director saying, "Give me money because nobody else will." In the universe of the producer, Springtime for Hitler was meant to be an outrage piece designed to bring money into the lead's pockets, and it makes me wonder if that's what Hitler's Folly is too, and if the film should even be taken seriously because of that. An intentionally bad, unfunny piece of trash completely void of any kind of wit or nuance that only exists to put a spotlight on Bill Plympton's larger body of work. I mean, I guess I'm here, I watched it, I got mad at it, and I made a whole YouTube video about it. So I guess that's the best joke that this movie could have told. Bill purports that he released this film online for free as a gift to his fans, even though Bill himself stated in interviews that one of his motivations for not monetizing this film was so that he could use copyright imagery without having to pay for the legal costs to use them.
But I didn't want to pay a lawyer $10,000 to go through the film and then pay another $10,000 in rights, so we decided to release it for free.
But even so, his film is just too edgy for any Hollywood exec to ever want to buy. It's just too offensive. Never mind that The Producers is a film that got made twice and spawned a Broadway musical that ran for 2,502 shows before closing in 2007. Bill really wants to impress upon us this idea that this film was a labor of love, made in spite of stuffy mainstream media, released for free online to his most loyal of fans. But let's be honest with ourselves here, nobody would have wanted to buy it anyway.
Is this the biggest pile of horse crap you've ever heard?
Honestly, really, Michael, how much weed were you smoking on a daily basis? Come on. I mean, is this even worth my time?
Tim.